Друзі, вітаю! Наш брифінг присвячений.
Dear friends, greetings on our briefing dedicated to exposing the lies and propaganda of the aggressor state. Let's start with how in recent days Russian propaganda is trying to stop the spread of information about the huge losses suffered by the Russian military during the attempted storming of Pavlivka near the town of Vuhledar in the Donetsk region. Information about the losses was made public by the Russian state propagandists themselves. In particular, the presenter of the Russian television, Alexander Sladkov, published the appeal of the troops of the 155th Brigade of Marines of the Russian Pacific Fleet. He reports that during the recent events in this direction, this brigade suffered losses in the amount of 300 people killed and wounded. After that, the information became widespread in the Russian media space, and they tried to silence the truth. Throw-ins from the head of the Primorsky Krai were that he allegedly contacted the commanders of this brigade, who said that the losses were much smaller. It would be strange if the infantry commanders informed the governor that they had indeed suffered huge losses, and then he would inform the entire Russian society about it. The truth is that the Russian military suffered huge losses during the offense on Pavlivka, in particular because these lines of defense are guarded by our heroic soldiers, including the 72nd Brigade of Black Zaporozhцы, which took part in the defense of Kiev and repelled the enemy from Moshchun and Irpin, and then defended Ukraine in the direction of Dergachi and Bakhmut. Now they are defending Vuhledar, and to date the losses of the Russians are really high. Their attempts to capture this territory were unsuccessful. Russian state propaganda can be advised to find more subtle ways of refuting this truth. Meanwhile, it is noticeable how the Russian Ministry of Defense is trying to increase the military result in its reports. At the last briefing, I told that the Russians began to include information about the destroyed pickup trucks in their reports. Now they have gone even further and are now reporting on destroyed cars. In particular, in one of the reports of the Ministry of Defense of Russia, dated November 7th, they report on alleged Ukrainian military losses, including tanks, armored combat vehicles and 5 cars. If this continues, very soon the Ministry of Defense of Russia will begin to attribute to itself the destruction of bicycles and other devices, the movement of which civilians use, in particular scooters. We wish them further success in ascribing non-existent military victories to themselves. Russian propaganda continues to invent fakes about the presence of foreign mercenaries on the battlefield. Now they also lie about women. In particular, RIA Novosti, a Russian state agency news, writes, Polish women mercenaries participated in the Ukrainian offensive alongside men. Let's see who is the source of this throw-in. A Russian serviceman told RIA Novosti about this. Neither his last name, nor his first name, nor his military unit, and even his face were shown. Just a man in a mask comes to the camera and tells this nonsense. Of course, this information does not correspond to reality and is another example of how Russian propaganda tries to justify the losses they suffer and the lack of military success on the battlefield, saying that they are fighting not with Ukraine but with NATO countries. Now it appears that women of NATO countries fight in Ukraine too. In the meantime, the situation in the Kherson area remains difficult for the aggressors, and they have already invented seam documents, or temniks as they are usually called, for their propagandists, which they will use to explain the possible withdrawal of Russian armed forces and manpower from this city and its loss. In particular, in these seam docs, they explain that they say NATO together with Ukraine is forcing Russia to retreat. In particular, that holding this city does not make sense, since urban combat will bring heavy losses to the Russian army. And as a cherry on this cake, there's a story about the Russian Tsar Peter I, that during the war with Sweden, he also withdrew his troops from Poltava. We wish Russian propagandists more creativity in order to explain new and new defeats on the battlefield in Ukraine. Another fact that we noticed in the information space was spread by Russian propagandists about the fact that some graffiti with the face of President Volodymyr Zelensky was depicted in Warsaw. But as it turned out, this information is a complete fake. As the spokesman of the Warsaw district, Wola Mateusz Wilczyński, said, "This place, which is mentioned as the place of the image of Volodymyr Zelensky, does not have such an image. It's a delusion. It is a fake of low quality, which is based on an old photo." The representative of the Polish authorities informed, and everyone who is in this city can see for themselves that it is a fake. In conclusion of the briefing, the traditional appeal is not to believe the lies of Russian propaganda. Trust the Ukrainian teleson, Ukrainian local authorities, military and political leadership. See you.